Greetings and salutations and welcome to this League of Legends news bulletin. I'm your host Ahrtgames, bringing you all the latest League of Legends news and community comment. In this week's news headlines, Ahrtgames announced their next game, Cho'Gath Eats the World, and released a temporary open beta, which I really hope is going to come back. This was Ahrtgames' April Fool's joke, for those of you who aren't aware, and it was basically Rampage, played as Cho'Gath. It was actually really fun for a little online flash game, and I would like to play more of it, having only been able to complete one level due to time limits on the day. If Ahrtgames don't keep this game on the internet, or bring it back in some way, I'm going to be really irritated with them. Because it was good. And there's been massive outcry agreeing with me that this needs to stay up. I also have a slight issue that it doesn't really fit in their usual theme of Earth Day, but I don't mind if they don't want to do Earth Day as Earth Day anymore because they're out of manatee skin ideas. That's perfectly okay. In slightly less humorous news, Trundle is receiving a champion rework, completely changing his lore, slightly changing his abilities, and changing the direction of Trundle from a champion who is disease-based to frost-based. There's going to be a lot of people quite upset with this change, including myself. There's a group of people known as the Secret Society of Trundle Players. That's right, this is a real thing. These are players who recognized that Trundle was in a borderline overpowered state and didn't want him to be nerfed, so they made it out that he is a terrible champion. There's a large Reddit group based around the idea of Trundle's good, but we can't let anyone find out or he'll become super popular and he'll get nerfed. Trundle was an interesting champion because his main power was his ability to take strengths from his opponents and give them all to himself. He could take almost every, well, not every stat, attack damage, armor, I think magic resist, and health, and take it directly from the enemy champions he was fighting, bringing it into himself. Very powerful. They've taken that away somewhat, giving him more standard debuffs. He has retained his ability to steal attack damage, but I believe it's going to be nerfed somewhat. My biggest problem, however, isn't that they've changed his ability set and they're going to offend the Secret Society of Trundle Players. My issue is that they've completely changed his lore, and while I don't have a problem with Riot advancing the lore, I do have a problem with them rewriting a backstory. I don't think it makes sense that you can have an established person and then change their story. Yes, the lore of League of Legends isn't really a big deal for a lot of people, but I'm not okay with just changing someone's story because you feel like it. I think if they wanted to continue with lore changes, what they should do is try and bring some progression into it. Say they've achieved their previous goal and then move to a new goal. I'm not really sure how that would work out, but Trundle was a champion who was diseased. Surely he could have found the cure by now and then become the Troll King, instead of just changing his history altogether. Sejuani is also going to experience a large champion rework, shifting some of the power of her abilities and changing in small ways how each ability works. I feel like her ultimate is going to be nerfed in the AoE side of things, but for the most part her abilities stay fundamentally the same, but with slight differences. Her charge is getting a knock-up, and her aura ability is going to be changed in some strange ways. It's becoming an empowered strike instead of just an aura, which I'm interested to see how that'll turn out, but For the most part, Sejuani looks like she'll be remaining largely the same, just receiving a visual rework and again a change with the lore. And whilst I'm not comfortable with a change in the lore in any respect besides the progression, which I've already discussed and don't want to go into again, I feel that Sejuani is not as big a change as Trundle is. And while there is a large number of very die-hard Sejuani players who quite like her, I don't think they're going to be overly offended by these changes. Doesn't look like she was OP to begin with, and she's not going to be OP or underpowered at the end of this. At least not in my personal opinion. We shall see, won't we? The only other important piece of news from League of Legends lately is the announcement of Lissandra, an Ice Mage champion coming out in the near future, who's designed to be a mana-efficient mage, crowd control and kiting being her major points, rather than raw damage, so she ain't going to be a nuker. Taking a look at her ability set, there's nothing overly dramatic here. She's got a passive very similar to Nunu's passive, allowing her to get free abilities. And other than that, most of her moves are fairly standard. The only largely interesting thing is that she can self-cast her ultimate, which is normally a stun, but if she casts it on herself, she gets the same aura effect from that ultimate, but instead of stunning, becomes untargetable and invulnerable. So she can basically Zhonya's Hourglass while damaging all surrounding enemies. Could be very, very interesting in saving your life temporarily, particularly if combined with said Zhonya's Hourglass. Other than that, she doesn't look statistically very interesting, however her art style is incredibly cool, and I'm quite excited to see what they do with the skin. She looks like an interesting champion, not anything special, but could be quite fun to play. Those were the news headlines. Moving right along now to Breaking Bronze. This week's tip for breaking out of Bronze League is purely strategic. Learn to push, but learn not to overextend. It's quite simple when you really break it down. Pushing is taking as much of the lane as you can get. Pushing it down. Taking minions, taking towers. That is how you push a lane. Overextending is moving beyond where it's safe and putting yourself at risk. You can push a lane alone. You could be an AD carry who's won their lane or lost their lane, and so their lane is largely vacant now. You can farm there alone and push that lane all on your little lonesome, and you can be perfectly fine. However, keep an eye on your map. If there is more than 2 enemy champions not visible on that map, you're putting yourself at risk. If there's more than 2 enemy champions not visible on that map, and you've pushed past the enemy outer tower, you've overextended. If there's 3 champions missing, you probably don't want to be in that lane unless you've got a tower there that you can hide behind and teammates moving to support you. It comes down to keeping your eye on the map and being aware of what's going on while taking care of things on your own. If you're solo pushing a lane, either as top or as a bottom lane champion, do it carefully, but still do it. If you don't push that lane, you run the risk of preventing your own victory by not having the map control that you could have had, or simply there's another tower that you need to deal with later. But if you push too hard and the enemy team punishes you for it, that is, again, your own fault. It's quite a balancing act, really, but against low-level players you can take down both the towers in one lane before any other towers have fallen on the map. It can be done, and if you're smart about it and careful about it, you won't ever die because of it. The last important thing here is to know your escapes, but that is of course another story. With those tips in mind, I will now be answering your summoner questions. This first and sadly only question comes in from Dr. Bomb. I wanted to know your thoughts on Thresh and the roles he should play in both normal and ranked. I played him tanky, but only in bot games. Just wanted to know your thoughts on the matter, as there has been some heated discussion on the forums about his role. It's... I see Thresh as a support champion, but at the same time he's very capable top, and I think you can play him in the jungle, though I've never tried. I see him as a support because all his abilities are very, very useful in that way. The sheer amount of displacement he can bring to the enemy team if played correctly, it's on blitzcrank levels of really freaking irritating. And at the same time, he can, if your team is in control, he can easily collect the souls that he needs to build up some serious power toward the late game. If you're playing him in support, build the standard support items. Your job is to displace the enemy team, irritate them, and cause some really good initiation, which you can easily do with a good pull and then flinging people about with that move that everyone recognizes, but I can't remember the name of. If you're playing him in the top lane, build him Bruiser tank, because he gets massive benefit from extra AD. It's still magical damage, but he gets up to an additional 2 times his AD on his first hit in a fight. And so he can very effectively play the Bruiser role, whiplashing the enemy team into submission. The other role you can consider with him, which is a bit iffy, but at the same time still incredibly dangerous, you can build him full AD. If you get, say, 4 Bloodthirsters or any high AD build out of him, you can get in excess of 1,000 bonus damage on your first strike. This kind of focuses all your power into one slot. You'll still be getting some of it on subsequent hits, and your other abilities are still more than capable of disrupting the enemy team, but you put yourself into a position where it's your first hit will wreck whoever you hit. So you focus down a squishy, take half their health, let someone else finish them off, while then you go back into what is basically a support role with none of the support items and not as much health. That's a high risk, high reward sort of build, not recommended for ranked. I wouldn't want to see him in a top lane, as I'd want someone who's more consistently a bruiser in top lane in ranked. Basically, I've seen him support, and I've seen him play incredibly well in support, and I think that's where he should stay. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the comment section below this video, and I will answer them next week. Until then, here's the topic of the day. Today's topic of the day is about masteries, and it's a twofold topic. The first bit is the idea of mastery pages, and the fact that I don't think they're necessary, and I think they can actually be quite detrimental to you. If you have multiple mastery pages, at the start of a game you have to switch between the mastery pages. Often, you'll forget. Now, I'm not taking a jib at you personally, because I don't know who you are, and there's probably a million different people watching this video, but I get into a lot of games and my friends occasionally say, "Oh shit, I brought the wrong masteries." Or, "Look at all 15 AP I have, what am I going to do with that while I'm playing, I don't know, Lee Sin?" Or, how about Vayne? Certain champions don't want certain things, and if you forget to change your mastery pages, you can find yourself in quite a pickle. There's no more complexity to it than that. If you forget to change your mastery page, you're screwed. What you can do instead is basically act like I do, or act like everyone did way back in the day. Before mastery pages were an option, what you would do is at the start of every game, you'd select your champion, and before locking in, you would choose your masteries. You would open the page and go, okay, what do I want for this champion? And you'd change it to suit who you were playing at that particular time. Now, sometimes you wouldn't need to change everything, or change anything, but you'd always open it to make sure, because if you've got the wrong kit, that's damage or health. It's something you're missing that you wanted to have. Better to be certain, which comes by opening the page every time, than it is to be just that little bit unsure. Now, if you don't have a problem, if you have never forgotten to change your mastery page to the champion that you want, all the more power to you. Keep doing what you're doing. But if you have ever forgotten your mastery page, maybe consider the fact that you should maybe tailor it individually to each champion on the game. Personally, if I know who I'm going to be playing before the game starts, before even entering the lobby, I will set up my mastery page for that champion. That's just how I do it. The second aspect to this particular topic is how I set up the mastery page. There's two basic ideas about how you can build a mastery page for your champion. You can either build complementary or supplementary. I build supplementary. Supplementary is the idea that I want something and I want a lot of it. So if I'm building an AP champion, I get AP offensive masteries. I'm going to nuke down the enemy team with extra damage. That's simply how I'm going to play. So I'm going to get the masteries that allow me to do that. The other idea, as I mentioned, is complementary. I'm missing something, so I'm going to get more of it. Keeping the idea of a nuker champion, I don't have much health. All my power is in the fact that I can beat down the enemy team instantly, but if they survive, what happens then? In that instance, build tanky masteries, build health, build armor, build resistance to status effects and slows. You do that, you're in a very different situation to how if you've built supplementary, but it fills out the weaknesses. However, neither of those ideas really have suggested that you should ever build support masteries, and there's not a lot of circumstances in which I actually do, unless I'm playing a support. If you're playing a support, you kind of want everything that's in the support mastery side, and any champion can benefit from that. Extra gold is always nice, extra experience puts you slightly ahead of the competition. But at the same time, I'd rather, personally, for most champions, build to increase what they have that I want. I'm never going to tell you specifically how I do my mastery pages for any of my builds for any of my champions, because often it changes on a game-to-game basis. But I'm going to tell you that the way I do it is to add to what I already have in abundance and get more of it. You don't have to build this way, but I find that it works. Thank you all for watching this episode of League of Legends News Bulletin. I will be back in 1 or 2 weeks, whenever I get the time, to bring you some more League of Legends news. Until such a time, thank you all for watching, and good night.